Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 1 of the Views on Vue podcast. This is our inaugural episode. Strangely enough, we're actually recording this second. We pre-recorded our second episode, but this will be the first episode that we release. I am your host, Joe Eames, and on our panel today we have Cher Stewart.
Hi.
And our special guest today is Evan Yu.
Hi there.
We have a few panelists that are missing today due to some scheduling conflicts, but we will miss them and we will see them back in future weeks. Before we get started, I doubt that too many people listening to this podcast are not going to know who you are, Evan, but I think it might be nice to just sort of get a background on you before you did Vue. Maybe talk about your history before Vue so that people and hopefully listeners that do follow Vue might learn something they don't know before.
Sure, yeah. So, right, we can go like way back. So I was born in China, and then I went to U.S. for college. I studied art and art history in undergrad. Didn't really figure out how to get a job in that field. So I went to a master's program for design and technology at Parsons, and that's when I seriously started doing JavaScript. And then I worked at Google Creative Lab for a bit over 2 years. That's when I had to do a few projects using Angular, and that's also when Vue was started. So after Google, I worked another close to 2 years at a startup called Meteor. It's also a JavaScript framework. And during that period of time, I also kept working on Vue. And eventually Vue grew so much, I decided to just do it full time. So, but yeah, that's pretty much the story.
Okay, so let's dig into just a few of these things. They popped out at me. So you worked at Google, and you said you were working at their research labs?
Google Creative Lab.
Google Creative Lab. So can you explain a little bit about what that is and what your role there was?
Yeah, so a lot of people probably heard of Google Lab, but Google Lab is a totally different entity versus Google Creative Lab. Creative Lab is more like a half agency, half creative agency, half UX research or prototyping team. So we sort of work with internal Google teams. So we take them on as our clients, and we have and the Creative Lab consists of a mix of creative technologists. That's me, and like filmmakers, creative directors, copywriters, product managers. So all kinds of different people from different disciplines all kind of work together. They form teams from time to time and work on different projects. So we collaborate with internal Google products and help them sort of come up with crazy ideas on how their product could be evolving next, and what a thing could be like in 5 to 10 years, or how we can improve the UX using some novel techniques, or just in general, just exploring new ideas. So that was a really fun environment to work in. And my role there was called creative technologist, which involves building a lot of prototypes. So we'd come up with some crazy ideas, and then we want to have something tangible so that people can actually interact with it and feel like what the end result would be like. So a lot of times it's like we would build these like prototypes with mocked data sets. So we don't really, because like the real product obviously would need like a really huge data set and backend to support it. But like in our like prototyping phase, we just like pretend we have all the backend technologies figured out and then figure out what the end user experience would be like. And my job was pretty much like building a lot of prototypes for that front end using web technologies.
That's interesting. I had no idea that whole thing even existed.
Like, yeah, so because the projects that we worked on are confidential, right? Like most of the stuff I can't even talk about, although we worked on quite a bit of like, projects there. The only few things that eventually, so the thing is a lot of the projects are confidential, a lot of them remain internal, so they circulate internally at Google, but eventually they don't necessarily turn into real products. A lot of time it's like one or two of the shining ideas from a prototype would then get absorbed into a real product. So that's sort of the type of frustration come from, because you keep working on that thing for a very long time, but eventually you don't get to really talk about it. Like, so I can only say like we worked on crazy ideas, but I can't really say what it is.
Right. Gotcha. Cool. And then you said that you worked at a startup. You called it, I didn't quite catch the name, Meteor?
Yes, Meteor. That's the full stack JavaScript framework.
Sorry. I guess it was a little bit of lag. I didn't quite hear the pronunciation, didn't hear that correctly. Gotcha. You worked on Meteor. Yeah. Well, that's really cool. Yeah. I didn't know that you worked on that as well. So you're working on Meteor, and you had said that Vue kind of had started up a little bit before you went and worked on Meteor, right?
Yes.
And so you were working on Vue. You went to go work on Meteor, and then there was roughly at that time that Vue just really started taking off, and you decided to go off and focus on that.
So for Vue to take off, like I think it's kind of weird because people often ask me like, when did Vue like started to blow up? And for me, it's really not like an overnight thing. It just there's several stages of growth, and every time it's like, oh, it's more popular than before. But if you compare it with today, like when I got like 3,000 stars on GitHub, I was like, holy crap, this is like the hottest project right now. But like compared to today, 3,000 stars is like nothing, right? Back then, the metrics were just different, because back then I was comparing Vue to other, new and upcoming experimental projects. And today people compare it with Angular and React. So that's like on totally different scales. So when I joined Meteor, Vue was like decently known, but like it's nowhere near where it is today. Mm-hmm. So people wouldn't even consider it something that, but back then Meteor was already like super well known, super popular. It's like one of the highest starred project on GitHub, and it got huge venture backing. So it's like when people think about comparing Vue and Meteor back then, it's like not on the same scale.
Right. Okay. So I think we got a pretty decent little picture here. Let's talk about the actual history of Vue and itself and how it started, the original idea and the early versions, and what happened there, and like. Let's just start with that. Just the creation, the original, initial inception and creation, and tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So as I said, I was working on all these prototypes, and we in a field of those projects, we were using Angular 1. That's AngularJS, to be precise. And so there were parts of it that I really liked. I liked the declarativeness, because before that, quite a few projects, we just like hand wrote everything in vanilla JavaScript, and we had to do all these manual DOM manipulation, which can be quite painful when the project grows, and the complexity of making sure everything state and DOM syncs correctly is just pain. If you've done that, you know what I mean. And when we started using Angular for that part, that feels right? Like you have templates, declarative templates. You just like tell the framework what you want, and when you change things, the right rendering happens. So That's what I like. But at the same time, there was a lot of things that we didn't really need for the type of prototypes we were building, like, dependency injection, all the differences between provider services and all those concepts you need to sort of grok before you can actually become productive with it. So I felt like, what if there is just this thing that just extracts the templating part out of Angular and because I just don't need all the other stuff. So that's when I started to say, like, maybe I can just build a very minimal version of it because that's all I really want. So I started doing an experiment. It wasn't even called Vue when it started. I just tried to mimic the reactive templating that Angular had. Although the implementation was quite different from the get-go, because I looked into the source code of Angular and noticed it was using DirtyChecking, and I felt I didn't really like that approach, and it's also tricky to eventually there was Angular 1 projects, a lot of them ran into performance problems, so that's why I thought I could maybe look at some alternative ideas of how to do this. And because we were doing prototypes, and it's only for Google, so everything only needed to work in Chrome. We didn't really need to care about IE compatibility or anything. So I was like, okay, so ES5 has object-defined property. It doesn't work in IE8, but I don't really care. So I can just use that to build a reactivity system that relies on ES5 getters and setters, but behaves similar to what Angular would feel like. So that's the initial idea, and I did a very simple prototype of it. It wasn't even meant to be a real project. It's just sort of like a weekend hack. Try to see if the idea would work, and turns out it worked pretty well. So then I started putting more time into it, but it wasn't like a really planned thing. I just gradually spent time on it over maybe several months, and eventually it got to the place where I felt like it's something that I would actually be willing to share with people.
Interesting. So let's go to the whole dirty checking. So you saw that Angular was using dirty checking. You were aware at the time of projects that were having performance problems, and you had the idea that dirty checking is a problem and causes performance problems is something that not just your average everyday developer, especially at that time, is going to understand and realize, right? It's kind of a little bit of a deep concept. Had you had experience with this sort of thing? What led you into saying, "Hey, dirty checking isn't the right way. I'm going to use another mechanism"?
Well, I wasn't. It wasn't necessarily saying dirty checking isn't the right way. It was more like I could see the trade-offs, right? In order to ensure correctness, dirty checking was the most straightforward way to ensure correctness when you re-render, but it's also sort of a brute force way to ensure correctness.
Right.
So, right, and it just felt boring if I just copied exactly the same algorithm that Angular used. So I felt like I want to try something different, and also the browser compatibility thing was another reason. So it isn't necessarily saying dirty checking is bad. It surely has its drawbacks, but at that time it was more about the idea of I could take some different trade-offs in return for something that would fit my use case better. And in the long term, because when I look at the dirty checking code, there was literally I don't know if the comment was still there. I was reading Angular's source code, and there was literally a line of comment saying, now we're going to recursively dirty check all the nested scopes. It might sound crazy, but it works. So I was reading that line. I was like, maybe we can do something different.
Gotcha. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. So had you this was before you started working on Meteor. So what to that point made you say, I want to build a whole framework? Right? Or what made you think that you could?
Right. So my work on Meteor wasn't I didn't create Meteor. When I joined Meteor, it was already a venture-backed company with a whole team on it.
Right.
The framework's already there. I was only sort of joining the team as an additional engineer to work on a small piece of it. So because Meteor is a full stack thing, the scope is just like way larger than what Vue was trying to do back then, right? Vue at that moment was really, really just a tiny Vue layer framework. It's like maybe less than 10% of what a whole full-scale framework would include. So Meteor had all these parts. It had like databases, the whole package system, its own templating engine, its reactivity system, the mini Mongo, the backend, front-end syncing. So it's a very complex system. So for me, joining Meteor was really sort of because it was a huge scale JavaScript project, and it was open source, right? And as I said, when I was working at Google, I got sort of, it was really fun projects, but, over 2 years that we kind of worked on a lot of these things, but very few of them eventually, I can't even share them. I can't talk about them. So I wanted to work on something that's, more open, that's sort of public, open source JavaScript. So Meteor was one of those, and it's also a company, a startup that could actually give me a job to work on it. So that's a very good opportunity, so that's why I joined Meteor. But it's not like I'm, for me, Vue was my project, but Meteor is different because I was only part of the team.
Gotcha. So, but going back to when you decided you wanted to start working on Vue, that's a pretty ambitious thing. You hadn't been working on Meteor, so you didn't have that kind of framework experience. To start up and write your own framework, it's a fairly ambitious task. Not a lot of developers would say, "Hey, I feel like I could write my own framework." Although it seems like every developer feels that way since there's so many out there. But that's still definitely not the truth. To be that ambitious and say, "You know what? I'm going to write a framework." So, what was it that gave you the confidence to say, "I'm going to go ahead and do this"?
Well, I think I didn't have that kind of ambition or the confidence in the beginning because it started as an experiment. I really didn't know if it would even work when I first started working on it. It only it's over time I realized this thing has potential. Maybe I can make it something bigger. So it grew from an experiment. It grew into a side project. Then it grew into a side project that's really just the Vue part. And then it grew into, we added the router, we added the state management pattern, we added a Webpack loader, we added the CLI. Everything was added over time. And the scope of the project just grew gradually. We didn't start in the beginning to say we want to build a whole ecosystem that competes with Angular. That was not the goal. And we only arrived at where we are today due to first because of the success of the earlier steps, and second because the demand of the community, people who are already using the previous pieces demanded more. So that's why we added more. So it really is like a very organic process instead of something that we decided from the beginning.
So what did the initial versions of Vue look like? Those first, before you even called it Vue, what did they look like? What did they do?
So I don't know if you've written Vue code before, but the simplest, right? So the simplest example, like the hello world of Vue, is you get a Vue global, right? And you just new Vue, create a Vue instance. You give it some data, you give it a template, and just binds the thing and renders it. So that's really all it did in the beginning. That's the only thing it did. All you had was this Vue constructor that you can create an instance and do some data binding. So that was all there is. And everything else was added on later.
What did you call it initially? I don't know that I caught that.
It was first called Seed.
Seed.
Because I wanted to use it as like the seed of a new project. But later on, I found out the name was already taken either on NPM or on Bower, so I had to just find a different name. And because it's a Vue layer library, so I tried Vue, already taken, and then also sound kind of plain if you just use the English version.
Mm-hmm.
So I threw it into Google Translate and saw, okay, the French translation is also looks like Vue, but it looks cooler, and it's not taken on NPM. So that's why it was called Vue.
Gotcha. All right. So that's like so there's the inception of Vue. So let's talk about when you started to see some popularity from it and usage. Like, so you created it for your own internal use, but you published it on GitHub and through NPM. Did you do much in the way of promoting it at the time, or was like the initial popularity, did it come completely as a surprise? People were discovering it on their own and started playing around with it.
I actually did some planned promotion. So when the first commit of Seed started, that was in I think late 2013, June or July 2013. Mm-hmm. But the public release of the project called Vue was in February 2014. So that's quite a bit, over half a year. I was just like working on it on and off in my spare time, trying to like shape it up. I think I actually only decided to make it a real project like in early 2014. I was like, this is looking pretty good now, so maybe I should just publish it. Then I already was, putting a few projects on GitHub, but none of them really had the intention to, say, get more users. So most of them had, terrible documentation, no versioning at all. Mm-hmm. It was really just like, it's not real like a open source project per se. It's really just like throwing your code on GitHub. But for this one, I was like, I really want to make this a real project. So I had to, have documentation. I have to have use Samver. I had to, do releases. I have to have examples and all the things. So I think I spent most of February, the first month in 2014 just writing the documentation. Huh. And that was, so that was one of the thing that we've been kept very, one thing that kind of defines Vue in some way is like we really care about the documentation, because we feel like if your project doesn't have a good documentation that allow people to understand what it does and to be able to learn it very quickly, then your code is creating much less value than it should be. So documentation is like an amplifier for the project itself. Right. So so after finishing the documentation, I try to look around and see how I could promote the project. I actually wrote a blog post on it. You can still find it on my personal blog, although I haven't been writing anything like since 2 years ago, I think. Uh-huh. But the post essentially covers the things I did. I posted on Hacker News, on Reddit, on Daily.js. It was a blog back then. I think it's discontinued now. And Echo.js also, I think. So a few of these like aggregating like Hacker News like news sources that people can upvote, and it actually got voted up to the front page of Hacker News. So that's how it got its initial attention. It got, I think, 130-ish votes, stayed on the front page for a few hours, and for the first week I got like several hundred GitHub stars. Well, that was already a big success for me back then. I was several hundred stars is like the biggest number of stars I've ever gotten. Right. And that really like made me, and surprisingly for the initial Hacker News thread, all the feedback was really positive. I think people were comparing to Knockout. They were comparing it to a slimmed down version of Angular, and mostly because for a new project, and I think that was also the time when the explosion of JavaScript frameworks just started. People hasn't had the term JavaScript fatigue yet. People were still pretty tolerant about these new frameworks coming out. Uh-huh. So yeah. most of the feedback was pretty positive. So that was good because I felt like, oh, people actually like this. So I should, feel more motivated to keep working on it.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how it got the initial use base, I think.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so you said that a few hundred stars was like a big deal to you back then. What is the Vue project at now, stars-wise, on GitHub?
I think 84,000.
Does that sort of redefine your definition of what is popular?
Yeah, I think I thought it was a big deal when we reached like 30,000 stars, but after that I just stopped counting because it just like then I think like it becomes less and less relevant as well because most people don't really look at the stars of Vue to say how popular it is.
Right.
Because after a certain stage, your project's no longer defined by how many stars you get.
Right. Now it's defined because people have heard about it.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the popularity of Vue, how it's been for currently right now, where it sort of sits at in popularity. I'm an educator. I keep an eye on the types of things that people are looking at and interested in, and I look at metrics and stuff. So I've seen a lot of very interesting things. One of the things that I think I've seen that is interesting about Vue is it's gained a lot of popularity outside of the U.S.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? And if so, do you have some speculation as to why that is?
So I think that's outside of US, there's also like two markets. There's the, I guess European and, maybe Japan is kind of its own market too. Mm-hmm. So, and China obviously is like completely on its own.
Right.
So Vue is popular in China, obviously because I am also active in the Chinese developer community. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people knew Vue through me, and because I also interact with the Chinese developers quite a bit, so and they also know like, oh, this framework is written by a Chinese guy. So I think it kind of explains why Vue is like, I think the Chinese market is where Vue has the biggest like market share in the world, but it's also quite popular in European areas, I think. Mm-hmm. Because from the stats that we have, we had the VJs Amsterdam last week, and it was a blast. We had like people coming from over 51 countries,
wow.
Even outside of Europe. So that was pretty amazing. So honestly, like I don't know why in European countries. Maybe it's because I think it like this is totally unfounded. Right, just for the record, this is just my speculation, but maybe it's because companies like Facebook and Google just have a much stronger mindshare in US, and in US, the tech trend is largely dominated by what's popular in Silicon Valley. Right, so because Facebook is using React, all the hot startups are using React, so the job market just kind of radiates from there, and then all the other companies in US sort of just follow what the hot startups in Silicon Valley is using. That's just my speculation.
I 100% agree that is a good speculation.
Well,
yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I've actually ever heard that idea before or thought through it myself, but it does make a lot of sense that Silicon Valley has a ton of sway inside the US, and I certainly feel that as a person who lives far outside of Silicon Valley. And so I can imagine that in other places the sway is felt quite a bit less, especially when you get outside of the U.S. So you feel like the popularity of the Chinese market has a direct correlation to you and your activity there in the Chinese community?
Yes, there's definitely a correlation, and it's also because the larger companies in China, they are more open to adopting Vue because I think especially in the early stages, because we had quite a few also developers who are quite well known in the Chinese developer community. They were they knew Vue quite early on, and they knew me personally, so we knew each other, and they were a few of them kind of evangelized Vue inside their companies, and that kind of sort of helped Vue gain the foothold in the beginning in some of the bigger companies in China, and later on, because it's interesting because when you say that a certain big company is using a technology, then a lot of the other smaller companies are like, oh, they're using it, they're fine, so we should be okay with using this technology too. So
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about U.S. popularity. We're definitely seeing an explosion of popularity of Vue inside of the U.S. I would say it's one of the hottest frameworks that people really are interested in learning. When that translates into jobs, or at least for the time being, it doesn't seem like its popularity far outpaces its current employment level here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's true?
I think that's true. For a very long time, like I think there. If you compare the current like job demands for Vue, compare that with that of maybe half a year ago or 1 year ago. Like 1 year ago, job opportunities that's specifically asking the Vue in US was like literally non-existent back then.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just look at the growth rate, it's actually growing pretty well. It's just like the point where we started, we literally had to start from zero because Vue is an independent project. Like for React and and Angular, Google is already using Angular. Facebook is already using React.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a much tougher battle in terms when it comes to convincing people that this is a technology that you can sort of bet your product on. And over the several years I've been working on Vue, I've had to answer the same question countless times because people just ask like, Facebook is backing React and Angular is backing Google is backing Angular. Nobody's backing you. Why should we use your technology? And to that, the only thing we can do is just like show them the code, show them that other people have been using it to build things successfully, and show that we are committed to making it, maintaining it long term, and show them that we've been doing a pretty good job so far. So that's really an uphill battle because we didn't have the big brand name effect behind us. And that kind of becomes even more of a problem in the job market because, when people try to actually hire for people for a specific talent technology, that means they've made the bet. They're like, we are basing our product, basing a part of our company's revenue on this specific technology, right? So that's a much bigger bet, and people are much more serious about that when they try to get on that train. It takes a lot of time to build that sort of, track record and the confidence for companies to be willing to actually bet on a technology and hire specifically for it. Mm-hmm. So it was harder for us, but I think it's kind of worked out, and we're finally picking up in the job market. And there's also this I think at one time I was there was this thing about the curve of job growth and the curve of interest. There is these curves are sort of like, there is an offset. There's a delay between these two curves. Because it's easier to say you're interested in a technology, you're watching this technology, than say I'm actually now betting on this technology to build my product on it. Right? So for a lot of companies, they had to be in the speculation phase for quite a long time before they actually make the decision to actually hire for it. So I think eventually this growth in interest, this growth in developer popularity will eventually translate into growing jobs, but it's just a delayed curve that you have to sort of give the time for it to grow.
Well,
so I was on the job market during the summer. I left a particularly awful job in August, and prior to that, I had actually changed jobs because of a relocation. And so a year before that, Vue was something that was on my resume and React wasn't. And I had such a hard time, even having interviewers understand like what Vue was, and they were just concerned that I didn't know React at that time. But then during this past summer, I actually had a contract job based on the fact that I knew Vue. So it made me an attractive candidate. It was a startup company, obviously, but that just goes to show like the difference, the time between a year where interviewers don't even know what Vue is versus interviews being excited that you are well-versed in that technology.
Definitely.
I think there's another interesting phenomenon that goes on in the tech industry for certain, and I'm sure it happens in other industries. So like the language Java was invented by Sun simply because Sun's marketers realized that it was actually the developers that determined what hardware that their companies would buy. They were the ones who really had the most influence. So they decided that they could corner the market or try to get better market share by creating a language for developers, a software that developers would really want to use. So they were actually targeting the developers to get them to then say, well, I like Java. It's cool, and so we need to buy the Sun hardware. That was the whole point of Java. That still exists today, where in a strange way, but in a lot of companies and to one degree or another, the developers are sort of the tail that wags the dog. They make those calls a lot more as to what technology should be used, and rightly so. These are complex choices as to what is the right framework to use, what technology stacks to use. You don't want to put that sort of decision in the hands of somebody so high up the ladder they don't have a concept as to what they're asking. So I think we'll definitely see a big shift as people who are showing interest now gain more and more political sway or start new projects and get the opportunities to say, let's do this in Vue. And then all of a sudden you got a tiny project started in Vue. Now it's a big project and you're hiring and you're looking for Vue developers. And I think we'll see that trend here over the next while.
That's a good point.
All right. So, boy, we really spent a lot of time on popularity. We got a few more things I want to get to, but we're already we're bumping up against our time. So let's talk about the team, the Vue team. If you can rattle off for us some interesting information about the team that's helping you out now with Vue, and so we can people can get an idea about that.
Sure. So first of all, the Vue team is really a loose concept because although we do have people in the Vue.js organization, we have a Slack. There's really no, say, official application process or anything. Most of them just became part of the team because they just started contributing on their own. They saw some things that they felt that could be improved or fixed, and they just stepped up and did it. And then they did it several times, and I noticed it. I'm like, wow, this guy's doing amazing work. So I would reach out to them and invite them to the team. So that's most of how the team is formed. And so recently we've had some pretty exciting things in the past few months. We had ESLint plugin Vue, which is the ESLint plugin that is able to parse your Vue templates and find syntax errors in your Vue templates in addition to your JavaScript. So that requires a completely custom written parser for ESLint, and that was just done by volunteers. Taru, he's from Japan, and he worked on the parser, and Mikhail from Poland put all the things together, did all the rules, and then they packaged it up and released the package, which is quite amazing because it's a lot of work, and they did a really, really good job on it. And then we have Guillaume. He's from France, and he worked on a big update for the Vue DevTools, which is our Chrome extension for debugging Vue apps. And I worked on the initial version of it, and I always had this, this guilty feeling because it was quite a complex setup. And I felt like I always wanted to write some documentation on how you can actually hack on this thing. But he figured out it all by himself and made all of those changes. And then implemented some pretty amazing features, like you can edit the state you're inspecting and it reflects back into your actual app. So he did all of those, and we released another big version of Vue DevTools. And we're seeing more and more of these contributors just taking ownership of a piece of the Vue ecosystem. So I'm really happy about that, because the biggest thing about Vue is that we are growing in scope as a framework, but it wouldn't be, sustainable for the long term if it's only me. So I'm really happy seeing that, more developers are able to just take ownership of a piece of the ecosystem.
Right.
And then right. So that's the thing. So I want to also, we are actually thinking about some really cool things. Like we want to get the team together and do a hackathon thing where we hack on some projects in a week. And we also want to set up some more resources, just helping people, guiding them how to actually make meaningful contributions to Vue as a project as a whole. So this is something we want to focus on, just to this also kind of addresses a lot of the bus factor questions that we get all the time.
Right.
So yeah, that's something we are actively working on.
Cool. Now, another interesting thing that's going on lately is there's the new CLI. Could you tell us a little about that?
Sure. So the new CLI 3.0 just got into beta a few days ago, and it's a completely rewrite. And the biggest change is that it no longer So the previous version was really just a simple tool that pulls down a template and renders it and scaffolds the project. But all the configurations, Webpack configurations, are directly inside the project, checked in, which means once you scaffold the project, it becomes really hard to sync it for future updates, because the configuration is not a dependency. So it cannot be versioned, it cannot be just upgraded. So the new version, really, there's no longer a template. Everything is abstracted inside a thing called Vue CLI service, but we still expose flexible ways for you to configure the Webpack configurations if you want to. But by default, the configuration will be hidden, and you don't need to even worry about it if your use case is common.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't want to worry about anything, you can just use the default configuration. Then it becomes literally zero config, but you can also opt into additional plugins for unit testing, end-to-end testing, TypeScript support. We have great TypeScript support now out of the box. PWA support. You can also scaffold Vuex or Router if you want to. And you can even write your own plugin to extend functionalities of the Vue CLI service, which is a dependency that's inside your project, which means it can be versioned and you can upgrade it when we put new features into it in the future. And you don't have to eject in order to just tweak the Webpack configuration, because we expose an API to allow you to reach into it and make tweaks where it makes sense. So overall, we feel like we've managed to strike a good balance between flexibility and this sort of upgradability. Just we have a strong convention, but we also, when you really need, you should be able to tweak it to your desire. Mm-hmm. So it's in beta right now, so you can try it out by doing npm install g @vue/CLI.
Awesome. Okay. One interesting thing that came up when you were talking about jobs is, and I thought it would be interesting to ask you, do you know great places people can go if they're interested in getting a job doing Vue, places they can go and find them?
Yeah, so we have vuejobs.com. I believe that is the URL. Yes. So vuejobs.com, see a lot of jobs being posted there. I think that would be the main place that I know of. Other than that, I think local meetups probably would have good opportunities if there is one in the area you're in. Because I know there are more and more Vue meetups that I've seen them popping up all over the place. Right. So companies going there sponsoring those events most likely are looking for Vue developers. So that could be a good opportunity too.
Cool. I'd like to kind of wrap up with a sort of a fun question, which is, what are your hopes for the future for Vue?
My hopes. So interestingly, I think the higher level vision to Vue is really to be a framework that helps more developers enjoy doing front-end development, help them become more efficient to do their job in a more enjoyable fashion. So that's an quite abstract goal, but like really like everything that we are doing is sort of driven by that. We don't, because Vue wasn't really born out of the need of a specific company or a specific project. It started as my own itch to create a framework that I would enjoy working with. And I think we want to stick to that, goal. We want to keep making the framework something that's enjoyable to work with, something that can help more developers be more efficient with their job.
Awesome. That's actually really cool. What a great answer.
Thanks.
Well, we've been going here almost an hour, so we probably ought to wrap up. But we definitely want to thank you for taking the time to come onto the podcast and talk to us. I'll go first with picks. I've just got one pick I want to make, which is the book Linchpin by Seth Godin. It's a great book. It's a very easy read, and it's basically the core message is, are you indispensable? That's like the subtitle of the book is, Are You Indispensable? And I've been thinking a lot about this because I think I definitely have benefited a ton in my life and my career by doing everything I can to be excellent in the things that I do. And I obviously don't always do them, but in the places where I have strove, what's the past tense of strive? I have tried. Strive. Yeah, I have tried to be excellent and to make a big impact in the things that I've done, and I've in many cases just benefited a ton because I became a linchpin in whatever was going on at the time. And it's opened up tons and tons and tons of opportunities in my life and put me in places where I don't get taken advantage of because people are grateful and get a lot of value out of the things that I'm able to provide for them. So that's my pick, is the book Linchpin, and not just the book itself, but like living your life that way, which is be excellent at the things that you do so that your products, your efforts, your work is something that you are very proud of. That's my pick. Yeah. Cher, are you ready?
Yeah, I remember. So mine is an app. It's called Bullet Journal, which I don't know if either of you are familiar with bullet journaling, but basically the idea is that you reflect over some idea or a goal that you have, and then you take the time to write about why that's a goal of yours or why that quote is important or how it affects you, and just take some time to just like to yourself think about, reasons why you want to keep moving forward. And for me, I know that a lot of people are aware now of my mental health struggles, and it really helps keep me away from any sort of triggers and keep on moving forward in my life. So this app, Bullet Journal, which I think it costs like $3.99 or something like that. It's supposed to go with like the official bullet journal, which I don't actually use. I don't even actually write my stuff down every single day. Sometimes I just think about stuff. But this app does give you reflections every day to think about. So it's nice to have that nudge trigger. So it gives me an alert, and then it gives me a quote. And I actually post a lot of the ones that really hit me hard on Twitter. I take a screenshot of it and share it with other people so that they can have a moment to reflect on it. And it's just nice to find that space in your day to just kind of like take a step back and think about what's important, why you're doing the things you're doing. And it's kind of like what you were talking about, like making sure that you're putting your best foot forward. I'm the kind of person that I tend to like get really excited about a lot of different hobbies and projects. And of course, as a result of that, I get really burnt out and overwhelmed, and I don't finish any of them. And so I'm trying really hard to like make a list of goals and I'll pick one and I'll say, okay, I really want to accomplish this. Why do I want to accomplish this? Why am I interested in this thing? And then actually do that thing.
Awesome.
Cool.
Okay. Evan, how about you?
Sure. So I have 2 picks. The first one is technical. So there is a great project called Code Sandbox. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's an online playground that allows you to develop like a full project in a full project with either React or Angular or Vue, and it has amazing Vue support. So the author Eames, he was speaking at Vue.js Amsterdam last week, and his talk was amazing. And Code Sandbox is just really a cool project. There's a lot of little UX gems that's embedded into it, and it makes it a super impressive online IDE almost. And he's still cranking a lot of new innovative ideas into it. So if you want to quickly like prototype a Vue app with single file Vue components, you should definitely try it out because it's just amazing. The other thing is something I just recently got into, which is climbing. I don't know if any of you do climbing. I wasn't until just recently, but before that, I was just doing, when I do workouts, I just do like normal workouts, just doing weights or just running. And I wasn't able to keep myself really motivated, but like I found climbing to be much more enjoyable because every time you do a different route, it's like a whole different problem to solve. So it kind of makes the whole like moving and just like using all parts of your body much more fun than normal workouts are. So I would really like encourage like people who have never tried it to try it out. It's really fun.
Awesome. All right. Well, there was one last thing I know that you wanted to mention. Maybe it could be like an after pick. Is there's a Vue conference coming up, right?
That's right. So we have a VueConf US is the official VueConf that's coming up in March 26th to 28th in New Orleans. And the ticket sales still open, and we also have a bunch of great workshops. So 1 day of workshop and 2 days of content. If you want to, also there will be a lot of companies using Vue there. So if you want to meet people who use Vue or potentially hire people or find job opportunities, it could be a great idea to attend. So
cool. And I'll pitch in that there's another conference going to be coming up in October. The Framework Summit, which will be featuring a lot of content about Vue. It's a conference focused entirely on front-end frameworks, of which Vue is one of the ones that's going to receive a lot of focus. So you could check that out at frameworksummit.com. So a couple nice events coming up. Thanks very much, Evan, for being on the show. We really appreciate you spending the time again, and it was great to talk to you. And thanks, everybody, for listening. Thanks, Cher, for coming on, and we will see you all again sometime soon.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.